So
Yeah.
I'm going to change topics because we're still in the abstract space and I want people to talk concretely. So I will talk concretely and we'll see if I can get you to talk concretely. And while I'm talking concretely, if the audience would start thinking about the questions that they would like to ask to engage in this discussion, get ready and we will, in a minute, we will come around with microphones. So the concrete, we have social challenges, we have technical challenges to make just and sustainable cities. 2 months ago, we had a very big meeting of mayors and ministers from all over the world who came together to talk about how we're going to finance infrastructure. And they talked about how they're going to finance major infrastructure projects in places like Casablanca, in Warsaw, Poland, in all these places where building transportation infrastructure in those cities was going to cost billions of dollars. And in every case, they didn't talk about how they were going to finance the infrastructure. They talked about the process through which they were going to bring new stakeholders to the table and enlarge the size of the pool of candidates that are going to help them to solve the problems. Because collective action and the ability to aggregate funds, collective action, the social challenge is the thing that they overcame. So in Casablanca, they talked to 20 different authorities around the whole region, and they decided they would make one authority with interoperable tickets, and then they would begin to assemble new forms of capital to make a $6 billion investment. In Warsaw, Poland, in Manchester, England, in Atlanta, Georgia in the U.S., in Denver, Colorado. In all of these places, they asked the people to make an investment in their own future, and every time they said yes, they would do it, and they found a way to make that investment. So I would submit that the challenge really for sustainability, not just in cities, the challenge for sustainability environmentally is really how we get a new set of stakeholders to the table to think differently about a problem and to find a new solution in an area that they didn't think existed. Now, one of the major organizations or major sectors that we don't hear a lot from, who we're going to need to hear a lot from, is the private sector, because all this money isn't going to come from the public sector. And so we'll have to think about what are we going to do differently that is going to get these new stakeholders to the table to think and plan differently and to behave differently and to aggregate the things that we already have, and as Luis pointed out, the wealth that we create by bringing people together to make new places. So Raquel, I know you're just dying to get in here. So
yes, I think that what is behind this conversation now, which needs to be clearly put on the table, is that when we are talking about the wealth which is created, and also all the wealth which is embedded in new infrastructure, we are talking about a very perverse connection between all of that and land prices, real estate prices, costs. So we are not talking only about the cost of charges and utilities, but also we are talking about all the effects of those things in the market, which is when we have an open market like we have in all the cities, you have these effects. The effects of the transfer of all these wealth investments over land prices, which is privatized. But then you have planning. Planning is not just, in my view, a question of what is buildable and not non-buildable, common and private, which is very important, but also what will be the place for those people who have less money in a city that land will be every time more expensive.
So Raquel,
can you give me the role of it?
Can you give me an example that you have seen in your own life in which we've engaged in a process that got us to a better place?
And one of the key issues in order, and let's be very concrete and very positive, not negative on that, recognizing land titles, recognizing rights to the land where the people used to live is a way to define this place as a place, a permanent place, even in a context where you have land appreciation. So I think this is a responsibility of planning and responsibility of urban policy, and this is doable. It's not something that it's an utopia or something that has nothing to do with... What I'm saying is that there is a very important role for the state, which is regulate the market and using all the instruments in order to do that, in order to guarantee rights to people, even if they don't have the income or the level to be where the good places and the urbanized places are. Otherwise, we're gonna have very exclusionary cities anyway.
Deputy Mayor, quickly, and then we'll go to the audience.
Bom, nós estamos aqui na cidade do Rio de Janeiro. Foi citada a Rocinha. Eu citaria, além da Rocinha, gostaria de citar Pavão, Pavãozinho, gostaria de citar Dona Marta, gostaria de citar Chapéu, Mangueira e Babilônia, e gostaria de citar o Morro do Alemão. Onde nós estamos falando de programas que não são teses. Na Rocinha, se está desenvolvendo hoje um maior trabalho de urbanização dentro da comunidade, com relocação da população dentro da própria comunidade, com a implantação de equipamentos de saúde, de educação, de lazer e de esporte. Visível, basta chegar ali. Por que isso foi possível? Porque na Rio 92, para realizar a conferência, nós precisávamos de tanque na rua. Na Rio +20, nós estamos realizando essa conferência com todas essas comunidades pacificadas. E nestas comunidades pacificadas, nós estamos com o trabalho social do poder público, levando mobilidade, organização urbana com titularidade da propriedade, isto em cada comunidade respeitando as suas características e colocando instrumentos compatíveis com a sua história, com a sua cultura, com a sua forma de viver. Isso vocês tiveram a oportunidade de ver aqui a apresentação do programa Porto Maravilha, onde é a reurbanização de toda uma velha região da cidade que foi abandonada durante décadas, e aonde a transformação com a urbanização, principalmente das comunidades que eram antigas favelas daquela região, todas elas estão integradas e em plena execução com o trabalho de urbanização. Então isso não é mais uma tese, isso não é mais uma possibilidade, uma quimera, isso é uma oportunidade de quem está vivendo aqui Rio +20 ir no teleférico do Morro do Alemão, conhecer uma nova, pegando o trem, se conectar na própria estação do trem, pegar o teleférico do Morro do Alemão, percorrer as 6 favelas que fazem parte do Complexo do Alemão e acompanhar que programas sociais, que programas urbanísticos, que programas educacionais e que programas de lazer estão sendo desenvolvidos. Então, de fato, nós precisamos valorizar essas coisas. E com que recurso? Com que recurso que está sendo feito? Com o orçamento do poder público, aberto ao engajamento do setor privado, que tem participado em algumas comunidades, ainda de maneira periférica, mas que nós temos a absoluta capacidade política de compreender a total disposição para o engajamento do setor privado. Nós não fomos buscar financiamento no Banco Mundial para fazer isso, não. Nós estamos executando essas obras com orçamento público. Então são obras que nós não tem nada de fachada, não é a entrada, não é o elevador do Pavão, Pavãozinho e do Cantagalo ali na Praça General Osório, em pleno Ipanema, que permite que a gente possa acessar a comunidade. Isso tudo pode ser acompanhado e vivenciado, porque isso nos enche de orgulho da gente estar conseguindo na nossa cidade desenvolver um trabalho de harmonização, de integração da comunidade e de tornar a cidade mais justa para quem vivia na injustiça. Nós estamos fazendo programas de coleta seletiva, de coleta de lixo, Então, isso tudo, essa concepção ambiental de retirar as pessoas da área de risco, de realocá-la na própria comunidade, isso não é uma tese sobre cidade justa. Isso é uma prática de, dentro da cidade heterogênea, desenvolver justiça junto à população, que é parte fundamental, integrante dessa cultura, desse trabalho, desse lazer e dessa produção na cidade. Isso não é um programa genérico. Isso e nem é mais uma tese. E é importante que a academia se debruce sobre isso. É importante que os urbanistas, os pensadores aí, se debrucem sobre essas experiências, que são experiências feitas com muita dureza, com muita dificuldade, porque elas não são simples, elas se debatem, inclusive, com dificuldade de compreensão e de engajamento para que elas possam, de fato, se consolidarem na sua plenitude. Mas nós estamos seguros que nós estamos, de fato, executando não mais uma tese, como eu estou dizendo, mas um programa que está envolvendo milhares e milhares de pessoas. Então, é essa que é a característica que eu gostaria que a gente refletisse também para pensar o que está acontecendo.
Thank you. I'm going to open this up to the audience now. We have a question here, and I think we have some microphones. We have a question here and here. And let's make these questions and not long speeches, and so we can have time for a real discussion. Thank you. Oh, no? Does it...
Boa noite, meu nome é Roberto Anderson Magalhães, sou da Faculdade de Arquitetura e Urbanismo, professor. Eu queria trazer uma questão, porque eu acho que está se discutindo a questão da justiça e sustentabilidade dentro do âmbito do interior da cidade, essa discussão sobre a questão da relação dos pobres, etc. Mas eu queria trazer também um outro aspecto que eu gostaria que fosse discutido, que é a questão regional. No caso, por exemplo, do Rio de Janeiro, o Rio de Janeiro é envolvido por uma série de cidades mais pobres, em que uma série de questões, por exemplo, a questão do lixo, quando anteriormente havia um lixão na cidade de Duque de Caxias. No momento em que esse lixão teve que ser desativado, houve uma tentativa de colocá-lo dentro da cidade do Rio de Janeiro, que foi recusado, e ele foi levado para uma outra cidade vizinha sobre um aquífero. Da mesma forma, a questão do metrô. O metrô, hoje em dia, ele para nos limites da cidade do Rio de Janeiro, não atravessa a fronteira do município vizinho. Da mesma forma, a questão de saúde, há uma série. Então, e o Rio de Janeiro não tem hoje em dia, a única região metropolitana do Brasil que não conta com um órgão de planejamento metropolitano. Então, essa questão da justiça urbana tem que ser pensada também do ponto de vista regional, em que uma cidade sede monopoliza enormemente os investimentos e não dialoga com as cidades limítrofes. Queria trazer essa discussão.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jean Kwan. I'm the mayor of Oakland, California. When I came in, I have just one observation and then one question. When we drove in this morning to Rio, and it's the first time I've been here, my children and other family members have been here, it reminded me of Hong Kong when I was a student 30 years ago, when China was about ready to take off, and that there were slums that looked just like your favelas on the hills of Hong Kong. And today, everybody lives in condos. So you're on the edge of this economic, I think, growth and the great wealth that Brazil has. So my question is, how do you, what is your plan to preserve the culture? Because there's clearly different neighborhoods with different ethnic and distinct groups. And also, how do you integrate the poor with the community as a whole? And the reason I say that is that right now, Oakland, even San Francisco, there are papers that are saying that Oakland is cooler than San Francisco because Oakland has people of different incomes, not just 130 different languages, but poor people, working class people, and it makes the city richer and more diverse. And what's happened in Hong Kong and some of the new cities in China, I think you can learn a lot from them. Some cities did it well, some cities did it poorly, is that sometimes, like in Shenzhen, all of the people who work in the factories don't speak Cantonese, and that's the local language. That means people from other parts of China have come and taken over those cities.
Okay.
What?
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Now,
Yes.
your fundamental question in the beginning was what is a just city, and what is the practical implications of producing a just city? Now, I would like to recall the social democracy in some European countries like Sweden, the Netherlands, where the state policies was based on the principle of equality of opportunities and equality in results. What it means in practice, in a reality of developing countries like Brazil, like Rio, Recife, or any other city, where there is a very strong inequality, a spatial inequality of access to service and the benefits the city produces. So one of the policies, in my view, would be to tackle the land issue. Why is that? Because it is the land market, it is the allocation and delivery of land, or the concentration of access to land that actually divides the city of those who have access to everything the city produces and those who are pushed to peripheral land far away even to the boundaries of the city where cheap land is or where it is possible. And then you ask Raquel and the others, but what is that is working or not working? Well, there are a number of attempts that have been made. One attempt was, for example, the policies of land lease, used in a number of cities that resulted in an incredible amount of resources that were redistributed in poor neighborhoods to bring them up to speed to the other parts of the city. Now, in Brazil, in the Statute of the City and the Forum of Urban Reform, for many years promoted and pushed society to approve a legislation that finally, after 15 years, it was approved. And one of the instruments is called the Special Zone of Interest, which is very controversial because it's not widely accepted, but which enabled the municipal government to define the territory of the poor in the city, regardless what property of that land is and regarding of location. Now the challenge is, then comes back to what my director said about the political process in cities. That it's not easy to redistribute or to impose the legislation because there are a lot of political forces that do not like to have that so-called just city. So it's not so simple, straightforward, but we need to say what is working and what's not working. And there are examples there that enables, but you have to have political guts to implement.
All right, not to extend this discussion, but I want one example because we don't want, no, don't take the microphone, give him the microphone. I want him to give me an example because we want to know where this has worked and how it has worked. And we need to know not what the problem is because the problems are profound, but we need to know where the idea has worked and how we can learn from that.
Okay, basically, in the city of Recife, where it was born, it was applied as a civil society initiative for legislation that was in 1978, even before the city statute, which was approved 2001. And actually, at the city level, it managed, I don't say it resolved, it managed to protect and define 68 areas in the city where the boundaries of the special zone were defined, which meant it gave some entitlement for the population, but not necessarily the access to the benefits, because then the political process started.
All right, so panel, we have two examples of candidates for just cities. We have Oakland that embraces diversity, not just diversity of languages and diversity of cultures, but diversity of income, and they use that as an advantage. And we have Recife, which is using special zoning rules to actually create a way to capture the wealth and to protect land use to make for special uses that are more adaptive and also reflect the interests of the citizens. So can you comment a little bit on those two candidates for a just city, diversity and getting the rules right?
Yeah, I think the common trend between the two is the idea that a just city is heterogeneous in principle. A just city is a city where you have social mixture, you have a possibility of different people from different ethnicities, but also from different income, to coexist, then the question on what are the instruments for that, what are the procedures, and Claudio was pointing out of one of them, which is used in many other cities in Brazil as well. I can tell examples, even in São Paulo, in one of the most wealthy areas of São Paulo, there is a community that resisted there. The name is Jardim Edite, because it was protected as a social interest zoning, and now they live in a very nice social housing in place. And in principle, everybody will say, but how come you have a low-income community in an area, in a high-income area? How come? That's what the states are made for. Because if it's not, I mean, leave the city to the market, and that will be unsustainable, for sure.
Here's the thing. I agree with Raquel, and I think the gentleman's point was enormously important. On one hand, you have these sort of value capture mechanisms. They can be designed in ways that are directly pro-poor, that serve the interests of the poor. They can also be designed in ways that capture the value inherent in growth as cities change and grow and create new value, that capture it in effect for the political process, which is to say capture it for the public good, but then there must be a negotiation with a range of interests, renters and owners, the rich, the poor, etc., etc. I think we have a number of ways of doing this. You wanted examples. Amsterdam. They have an 80-year head start on some of this. For 80 years, they've been working to try and perfect their non-governmental housing corporations. They've put a good half of the land in Amsterdam, an incredibly wealthy, high-cost city, under social ownership. They have an interest in sustaining the enterprise. They have to have a viable enterprise. At the same time, they have a social mission, and they respect that. Do they have their challenges? Do they make mistakes? Sure. But they accomplish, Madam Mayor, in Oakland, a remarkable degree of mix of incomes and of ethnicities through that model. So we do have these ways of doing it.
All right, so I'm going to take just two questions, and then I'm going to ask our panel to tell us what their vision of a just city is and answer those questions at the same time, so they have to be very good. So we'll start here and we'll end here, okay?
Meu nome é Nelson Sauli Júnior, sou do Instituto Polis, que trabalha há muito tempo com essa plataforma do direito à cidade e reforma urbana no Brasil, numa rede, uma coalizão de organizações da sociedade civil. Para nós, essa discussão sobre cidades justas, cidades sustentáveis, acho que tem um ponto de partida que é muito importante, que é a questão desses grupos que estão nessa situação de desigualdade, né, terem um processo político, né, no sentido de educação política e formação política, para serem de fato atores que consigam dialogar com o setor privado, com os governos, com os partidos políticos que detêm, né, o domínio, o conhecimento das cidades. Acho que qualquer ponto de partida para a gente pensar em cidades justas e sustentáveis, sem que haja uma condição de que esses próprios grupos sejam fortalecidos enquanto sujeitos políticos, né, enquanto a sua capacidade, né, de ter um poder de organização e mobilização social para a busca das transformações, a gente não vai ter condições de realmente construir cidades justas e sustentáveis. E acho que no Brasil, né, o senhor toda hora está perguntando cadê as experiências. Convido o senhor para ir em todas as manifestações que vão estar tendo, né, aqui mesmo no Rio de Janeiro, com essa perspectiva, né, política de grupos e organizações sociais que querem uma outra cidade, que tem uma plataforma de uma cidade justa e democrática, que passa principalmente em reconhecer que esses sujeitos têm capacidade de transformação e de mudança. Eu acho que se esse ponto de partida for, né, considerado, aí nós temos como estar dialogando com uma perspectiva de mudança e transformação. Isso falando principalmente com relação aos partidos políticos, né, os governantes, as autoridades e o setor privado em especial.
Okay. Thank you. So there's another vision of the Just City is a trained and empowered population who can engage productively with the So mobilized population based on the right to the city. Okay, last word here, and then I'm going to ask our panelists to talk about their vision of the just city and the principles that define it.
Well, I can speak English, but I'm going to ask my questions in Portuguese in solidarity to Carlos and all the Brazilian Muniz and all the Brazilians who have to listen the translations in microphones. Bom, eu sou antropóloga. Há 30 anos eu estudo o Rio de Janeiro, eu estudei também um pouco Campinas, quando eu trabalhei. Meu nome é Alba Zaluar. Eu gostaria de fazer 2 comentários seguidos de perguntas para a Raquel e para o Muniz. Para a Raquel, eu concordo com você, o Estado tem que regular o mercado, não é? Mas uma das formas de regular o mercado no Rio de Janeiro, pelo menos, eu vejo assim, diante do fato de que nós temos dezenas, centenas talvez de favelas em áreas onde os seus terrenos são muito valorizados, AP1, AP2, AP3, Centro, Zona Sul, Tijuca, Barra da Tijuca, AP4 também, Barra da Tijuca, Jacarepaguá, etc. Uma das formas de regular o mercado é manter, né, as comunidades, urbanizar as favelas. Está acontecendo justamente algo ao contrário do que você sugere. Está acontecendo um processo de gentrificação, porque as propriedades, os imóveis nesses locais todos aumentaram muitíssimo de preço. E aí eu lhe pergunto, como é que o Estado vai regular esse mercado? Vai proibir a venda? Vai proibir que as pessoas vendam esses imóveis e voltem para o Nordeste para comprar um sítio e criar vaca? Como muitos deles querem fazer, aliás? Eu acho que não, porque nós vamos evitar um problema desse crescimento que é apavorante, né, das cidades nos próximos anos no planeta Terra. Para o Muniz, Muniz, eu concordo com você que é extremamente difícil tudo isso que está sendo realizado, que tem muitas questões, né? E eu vou ser assim, muito direta e prática, porque eu tenho acompanhado isso. Você diz, a universidade tem que estudar, eu tenho feito isso. Eu, com meus alunos lá na UERJ, temos acompanhado o desenvolvimento no Complexo Alemão, em outras favelas, na Tijuca. Mas o que a gente tem observado é que há uma grande questão aí que permanece, digamos, pouco cuidada, né? Pouca atenção está se dando para ela, que é a relação entre os agentes governamentais e também de não governamentais, mas principalmente dos policiais militares com os moradores desses locais. Então, um dos perigos que eu vejo muito claramente é que, com a instalação de PP, os policiais militares tendem a tomar tomar para si funções que já eram feitas por moradores, como, por exemplo, ensinar violão, ensinar capoeira e vários outros esportes, né? Isso está criando uma tensão enorme, porque os moradores que faziam isso estão se ressentindo, né? Varia um pouco a negociação, acho que eu já falei várias vezes com o pessoal do PP Social sobre isso.
So, pardon me, no, we need to wrap up, so do you have something that you can offer to us?
Yes, yes.
An example of a just city and
What example do you want me to give you?
I want you to give a concrete example of how
Em Cidade de Deus, policiais militares estão ensinando capoeira, violão. É esse o exemplo? Não, eu já falei. É isso que está acontecendo em Cidade de Deus. Por exemplo, está acontecendo com a... Outra coisa, constrói-se dentro das comunidades, estão realmente construindo conjuntos habitacionais, prédios, né, verticais. E aí, a chave da quadra de esportes fica na mão do síndico, né? E os jovens ficam do lado de fora olhando de água na boca, porque o síndico não deixa, com medo que eles vão fumar alguma droga ilegal lá ou fazer alguma bagunça. Isso é algo, para mim, impensável. Há que considerar que já haviam locais também para prática de esporte, alguns dentro de vilas olímpicas, como o Complexo Alemão, e essas quadras todas já existentes, que não podem ficar sendo controlados dessa maneira. É isso.
All right, thank you, thanks. So, all right, we need to make this come to an end. And so to come to an end, I would just like to ask our panelists one at a time to give just their idea of one principle that would define for them the just city, and hopefully one that would be concrete enough that we could use it to measure in the future our progress towards the just city. And I'll go right down the panel and ask Dr. Close to start.
Well, I think that the just city is the one who is able to establish the mechanisms of redistribution and of building a proper qualitative urban environment to allow for mixed population, mixed uses, and which has this politically strength to take care of their own destiny. It comes a little bit from inside the proper city, the will of the community, and also it requires some help in the modern times, some help of the state, because in modern times the state has a much huge access to resources than the cities.
So a just city is a city in which we see effective redistribution, and that's enabled by the state. And we could measure that.
The will of the city and the state. Yeah.
Sure. Raquel.
Well, first of all, responding to the question that was raised to me, the process of gentrification, so the effects on the market, they are always there. It's I mean, not only in the case of slum upgrading and all the intervention that are done in informal settlements. This is also in the case of other parts of the city with private property. When you have amelioration of the setting, investments, you have this process. And of course, the idea of forbid people to sell is absolutely nonsense. And it's absolutely, there is nonsense, and people have the right also to sell and to profit from the profits of selling it, which is not a problem. I think the problem is not individual in the terms that nobody can move out. Everybody can move out if one wants. But the problem is how the whole neighborhood changes his character and becomes a higher income neighborhood, and then the idea of having this popular territory inside the city is destroyed. So I think it, and we have no time to develop on that, but I think urban regulation, including zoning and other, can do a lot of things in order to preserve the characteristics of the area, the urban characteristics. And we should start talking about not only minimum plot or minimum housing site, but we should talk about maximum housing site, maximum apartment site,
so turn
maximum plot site.
So turn that into a principle. So what, for you, what principle would that be that would define the just city?
I think the principle would be an inclusionary city. Bridging the urban divide. The just city would be an inclusionary city, in one word.
Okay, Deputy Mayor, what principle would define the just city for you?
Bem, eu gostaria inicialmente de falar sobre dois temas antes de falar da cidade justa. Primeiro é o que a Alba levantou muito bem ali. Nós estamos vivendo problemas de novo tipo a partir dos trabalhos que vêm sendo desenvolvidos nas comunidades pacificadas. E esses problemas todos precisam de um tratamento adequado, são novos desafios, mas, como nós dissemos, num patamar que é um patamar muito positivo do ponto de vista da inclusão dessas áreas que anteriormente não eram áreas que estavam apartadas da cidade. Então, esses desafios, nós estamos atentos a eles e vamos, com a participação da comunidade científica, então, encontrar as saídas adequadas. Em segundo lugar, nós também gostaríamos e somos a favor de pensarmos a cidade do ponto de vista da inserção na região metropolitana. Agora, nós temos que respeitar os poderes que a legislação coloca em relação aos limites de ter ou não ter as condições de você estar agindo, fazendo projetos que passam da sua esfera de atividade. Então, eu vejo ali, o Anderson, inclusive, levantou uma questão quando fala da necessidade de pensar assim. E aí ele diz, bom, na hora de resolver o problema da disposição de resíduos, vocês foram para uma outra cidade. Mas nós fomos para uma outra cidade em comum acordo com a outra cidade. Nós, inclusive, propusemos uma solução metropolitana, ou seja, nós estamos colocando o resíduo da cidade do Rio de Janeiro, pagando por isso, e estamos coletando sem pagar, sem nenhum ônus para os municípios, o município que recebe esse centro de tratamento de resíduos, que é Seropédica, houve a remediação de todo o lixão de Seropédica e hoje todos os resíduos são depositados gratuitamente dentro para ônus do município do Rio, no centro de tratamento de resíduos de Seropédica, da mesma maneira em Mangaratiba e da mesma maneira em Itaguaí. Então, é um exemplo de solução metropolitana. Quanto à questão de que ele está colocado em cima de um aquífero, eu considero que isso não tem base científica, isso foi discutido amplamente em audiências públicas, ele foi licenciado, e continuar esse tipo de afirmação é um tipo de afirmação que eu considero como quase que uma opção pessoal de achar, porque do ponto de vista científico não tem absolutamente nenhuma comprovação de que nós estejamos colocando esse centro de tratamento de resíduos em cima do aquífero. E o que é melhor, nós adotamos todas as medidas técnicas, porque nós não queremos sequer que esse centro de tratamento de resíduos impacte o lençol freático. Ele não impacta o lençol freático. O que dirá se futuramente se constatar ou se tenha e que está demonstrado que não está lá o aquífero? Então, é levantar um tipo de questão que não tem condições de ser abarcado, que no máximo pode vulnerabilizar uma boa solução. No máximo pode nos colocar como irresponsáveis diante de uma solução adequada. Então, não vou colocar essa carapuça. Eu considero que a cidade justa é uma cidade que seja capaz de ter a integração dos seus mais diversos cidadãos, com as suas mais diversas vivências, mais diversas culturas, e compreendendo como chegar à cidade justa é um processo que exige muita democracia, muita participação social e muita clareza na execução dos programas dentro de uma visão holística de que o desenvolvimento não poderá ser um desenvolvimento com um D maiúsculo se ele não for um desenvolvimento econômico, social e ambiental.
Thank you. Luis.
You know, we have to understand that we're at a turning point right now. We have cities like Dusseldorf and Detroit and Cleveland that are shrinking, and they're shrinking in some cases dramatically. And then we have cities like Rio and Delhi and others that are growing extremely rapidly. And we have to begin to establish planning protocols for both. These people are leaving and these people are coming. And we need to step back and ask these great cities, and these are all great cities, whether or not they have the planning in place to begin to accept in what could be in Rio another 1 million people, what could be in Detroit 100,000 fewer people. The challenge in some ways is equal. Are we going to leave cities, older cities in places that are no longer growing, destitute, abandoned, with thousands and thousands of empty streets unable to be supported? At the same time, are we going to take cities that are growing and not plan for that growth? And I think a just city, whether it's growing or shrinking, shares the idea that it needs planning, transportation, zoning, inclusive zoning, and other kinds of city support decisions that plan, in some cases, for the shrinking of that city, and in other cases for the rapid growth. And if we don't see that kind of plan, it is impossible for a city to grow as a just city, or for that matter, to shrink as a just city.
So a just city is a city that is planned well.
Right, that is planned, and that it is planned in the context of the reality they're facing. We're going to have 1 million rural people come to that city. What does that mean? Where are we going to put them? They're not going to vanish. They're not going to disappear. They're not going to live underground. So where are they going to go?
Great. Zav.
I agree that good planning, and planning in context is absolutely crucial. If anything, I think, Luis, the lessons are, or the evidence is, that planning for shrinkage is in many ways even trickier than planning for growth. You wanted a practical answer. I think the just city is a house of 3 stories, okay? At the top level, for the resources that markets principally allocate, it's a city that functions with equitable development mechanisms for shared value of some of the kinds we've illustrated here tonight. A few members of the audience mentioned them, and they've been mentioned on the panel as well. We don't simply have a choice between the kind of universal public ownership model and a deregulated market. There are hybrids. There are mechanisms of shared value, and they're quite powerful. That's supported by what Europe has taught us so much about, the European model over many decades. Effective public services, ample public goods. This isn't rocket science. I don't think we have to overcomplicate it. But those 2 things rest on a foundation, in turn, of a vigorous politics of learning and of bargaining. I think that's absolutely crucial. If we had more time, we could explore these things, but the learning and the bargaining have somewhat different functions. Through learning, we discover our interests, we rethink our identity, what it means to share a place together. The democracy movement here in Brazil is one shining example of that, and we're still seeing the fruits. Bargaining, however, respects the fact that we're not all going to share the same interests. We're not, if we talk enough, going to end up in the same place wanting all the same things. Negotiation also is enormously important. That, I think, is the politics that upholds everything else.
All right, thank you. So we at the Ford Foundation know that the answers for a just city are not easy, and you could tell from the discussion today that this is just the beginning of the discussion. Our goal here is actually to make sure that we talk about cities when we talk about sustainability on the globe. And I think that you see today, and you'll see in all the events that are going on in Rio in this week, that sustainable urbanization has actually made it to the agenda when we talk about global sustainability, which is a good thing. We have more than half of the population of the world living in cities, and in 30 years we'll have 70% of the population living in cities. And so I just want to leave you with one thought. If we think that massive urbanization exacerbates poverty and exclusion, and that's the problem that we have to face, I think we should think again. Because the massive urbanization that we're going to see over the next 30 years is going to be largely the movement of people from rural poverty to urban poverty. And if we want to talk about poverty and exclusion, the poverty in rural areas is far worse than the poverty in urban areas. And the reason that people leave urban areas is because they are excluded and they have no future, rural areas to come to urban areas because they have no future. The fact that urbanization is a process to alleviate poverty is something that we have to come to grips with. And one of the facts that we should think about is once people come to urban areas, massive transfers of income go from them back to their rural sending areas. Why is that? Because they have come for prosperity, they have come for futures, and they have come to make lives better for entire networks of families. But they do it by urbanization. Urbanization is not the problem, urbanization is the solution. And when we think about the Millennial Development Goals and the post-MDGs, we should think about how we use urbanization as one of the most effective anti-poverty mechanisms that we have. This is going to require creativity, this is going to require new partnerships, this is going to require processes that we haven't even imagined yet. But this is where we are, and we're very glad to have this discussion here at a place like Rio. So I thank you for coming, and I thank our panelists. Please join me in thanking the panelists.